gonna be cool.
The topics and opinions expressed on the Dudes and Beer podcast are intended for an audience of 18 and up and are solely those of the host and guests. They neither reflect the opinions or values of either the sponsors of Dudes and Beer or your mother. I mean, seriously, have you ever heard these guys? They'll talk about anything.
Whoa, hey, you think they're gonna show it? They'll probably just blur it out. Whoa, check it out, Beavis.
Grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. Solving the world's problems 12 ounces at a time. It's Dudes and Beer. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Dudes and Beer, coming at you live from the cave here in Austin, Texas. I am Chris Jordan, your host. I am here with Stephen Bishop, Matthew Fitzgerald, and Nelson Kugle once again. The
Back
Kugle,
at it.
ladies and gentlemen. The Coog. Still here. The Cougar. Bringing it at you.
Older ladies, I'm all about y'all, so hit me up.
Little Dr. Feelgood bringing us in. And oddly enough, I actually chose this before we chose the topic for tonight, which is actually prescription drugs in America. The phenom
drugs.
that is prescription drugs and what it's doing to our youth, what it's doing to the fabric of our society as we know it, when we come back from this message from our sponsor.
Hey, are you a musician? Do you play guitar, bass, or synthesizers? Are you a studio engineer looking for that different sound? Well, fret no longer. Austin Hot Mods is there for you. From Boss to Ibanez, DoD to EHX and more, Austin Hot Mods provides over 50 different modifications and customizations to some of the most popular guitar pedals on the market, from vintage to modern. So if you're looking for that boutique custom sound on a Craigslist budget, look no further. Contact Austin Hot Mods today and mention that you heard it here on the Dudes and Beer podcast for 5% off your first guitar pedal modification. Visit them online at austinhotmods.com. Texas owned and operated and home of the Mod of the Month deal. That website again is austinhotmods.com.
That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we are back, and the topic for this evening is prescription drugs in America. You know, we have had a rash over the last few years of incidents with mass shooters, things like that. Even the one here in Houston over the last weekend, over Memorial Day weekend, where he was known to be depressed and on some kind of medications. And to me, it has become something that is almost endemic in our country. I mean, I remember being a kid, and this was back in the 80s. They wanted to put me on Ritalin because I was a little bouncy in class, distraction to myself and others, as was frequently on my progress report. And they put me on it for about a week, and then they were like, please God, take this kid off Ritalin. He cannot stay awake in class.
Settle down, Chris.
Yeah, settle down.
Wake
and
up,
then suddenly Chris was sound asleep in the middle of class. I was one of them that Ritalin had the complete opposite effect for. But what brought about this was our conversation after our last live episode, where we were outside and we were talking about the recent High Times article that came out, talking about how they have come out with the chewable form of speed, you know, that's basically your Adderall or your Ritalin prescription, but in gelatin form that's chewable and allowable up to kids of 6.
I'll take some.
Now, my question comes in the fact of, really, you're going to medicate a child of 6. And that's where I want the discussion to start. Go ahead.
I don't
Well,
think so.
my girlfriend, she takes Adderall. But she didn't start taking it until she was in high school.
Right.
And her parents, bless them, they realized that she was very energetic and very, you know, like what they call, and I'm going to say quote unquote, symptoms of ADD or ADHD.
Sure.
Okay. But I think that it's incredibly difficult to accurately prescribe a child that type of drug because children are crazy. No matter who they are,
their brains are still
they're still developing.
That's just it. You're still developing.
Yeah,
and
you're still
until
developing.
the age of 18, period. I mean, really, until the age of 2021, your brain is truly still developing.
Right. Well, but, for her, it was a situation where her parents were like, no, we're not going to medicate our child.
Yeah.
We're going to wait until our child is of an age enough where she can make this decision for herself and can really, analyze the situation and say, okay, I have trouble focusing, I have trouble, whatever, and I'm going to... take these pharmaceuticals. That's exactly what they did, and I think that is the proper approach for especially any of these, controlled substances, whether we're talking Ritalin, Adderall, those sort of things. I think that you need to let things play out, especially with a child. Okay?
Absolutely.
I mean, you can't, like if you start prescribing a child at a young age, what does that do psychologically because of the effects of the drug?
Exactly.
What does that do psychologically that child at 7, 8, 9 years old is all of a sudden like, here, take this pill every morning?
The brain is still forming, and
Yes.
what effect is that drug doing on the whole life of that brain?
That child all of a sudden is like, oh, well, okay, why do I have to take this pill every morning? And then they take the pill every morning, and it makes them feel incredibly different than they usually are.
Right.
It's not just... I mean, look, I've taken Ritalin, I've taken Adderall, I've taken, Concerta, all of it, pretty much, as far as those study drugs go.
Yeah.
And it was all in college. And, I mean, the reason I took them was to, focus and stay awake and, really go for it on my homework. But I know for a fact it made me feel different. Right. Even when I took, 10 milligram Ritalin, which is one of the lowest prescriptions that you can get, I remember being like, okay, I'm going to take this Ritalin because it's going to jack me up and I am going to be able to stay up for the next 3-4 hours and really hammer out this homework.
Right.
I mean, we were mentioning it earlier, the concept of prescribed speed.
Right.
Yeah.
You're going to give that to a child?
Well, and that's just it. I'm of the mind, I don't pull any punches, as you boys know. I'm also not afraid to rabbit hole on things, and for me, it's one of those, I'm going to call a spade a spade. Yeah. If it's Ritalin, if it's Adderall, whatever, dude, it's friggin' speed. It's prescription speed.
Right.
It's nothing more, and it's no different than the FDA approving OxyContins for children between the ages of 10 and 11 a year and a half ago, where it's like that shit just flies under the radar and nobody seems to pay attention to it, and then years later, dude, Oxy is literally the most abused drug ever in America.
Yes.
Right now, they're looking at hundreds of thousands of people a year that die from OxyContin use and abuse.
Right.
It leads to harder stuff. It leads to addiction to heroin, all kinds of stuff.
That's what I was going to say, is when you prescribe that, I mean, you want to talk about marijuana being a gateway drug.
Let's talk about tobacco being a gateway drug, because that gets you into the circle of drinking beer and things like that.
Because a lot of people,
marijuana does.
That's true.
Exactly, because a lot of
It's
people
true
that I know who do smoke cigarettes only smoke while they're drinking. I don't smoke cigarettes.
That's it.
And then when you go out to the bar and they're having a couple drinks,
And
they're chain smoking.
I'll bum a cigarette.
Statistically, it's been shown that tobacco is much more of the gateway drug than marijuana is.
For sure,
because
man.
you're going to know somebody that smokes cigarettes far before you're going to know somebody that smokes marijuana.
Well, even when being high on marijuana and having a cigarette, it's a totally different feel.
Exactly.
And I'm going to admit, and I don't give a shit, I'll be sitting there and I'll have 2 blunts with my friend, and next thing you know, I'll light up a cigarette, and that first inhale, when you're sober with a cigarette, midday, you haven't had a cigarette since 8 a.m., and you have that cigarette around 11:30 right before lunch, and you take that first inhaler, and you take that big puff, and you kind of swallow it down, and you're like, oh my God, and you feel that rush,
Yeah.
But when you are drinking and you have that rush, it's totally different, and especially when you're smoking marijuana and you have that tobacco rush, it's totally
and that's
different.
the thing. We did an episode not too long ago about psychoactive drugs, psychotropics, all kinds of stuff, and Since then it's come out that psilocybin in its pure form can actually be used to help depression in controlled circumstances, in the right circumstances. Like, I don't propose the fact that everybody in the world should smoke marijuana. I really don't.
Right.
Not everybody in the world should drink beer and drink alcohol. Like, I know people that 3 drops of liquor hits their tongue and they're a totally different person.
Yes, and they're like stupid. They're like,
not just stupid.
Like
they're violent.
Well,
they do things that they don't remember.
Not intellectually stupid.
But stupid is it's an okay way to put it.
Yeah, no,
total personality change.
It's the same way with marijuana. There are some people that can function on it, and there are some people that can't.
Right.
There have been people that are like, "Oh my God, how do you get what you get done while you smoke weed?"
Right.
Like, hey, that's just how it is.
Right.
Like, for me, it puts me somewhere that helps me get stuff done.
Right.
And I don't think, I just do. And the thinking is what causes problems for me. Whenever I'm just doing what I'm supposed to be doing, I'm fine.
Well, when I was in college, my first year and a half of college, I was in the journalism program, and I was going to be a broadcaster. After that is when I switched to theater, but when I was in that program, I did a story one time for a class about medical marijuana in Minnesota because it was on a ballot.
I remember you saying that.
And they were talking about like the effects of it, whatever. I got all dressed up, got my briefcase, and I went over to the state capitol in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I sat in on this hearing about medical marijuana. And they had both sides of the coin. They had doctors that were up talking during this hearing saying, these are our studies and these are what we know as, like generally speaking, the effects of marijuana, especially on whether it's mental health or cancer patients or things like that. There was an old man that went up in front of the hearing and he was like, my wife was suffering from like serious cancer and her pain was unbearable. Right. And no matter what they prescribed her, the pain was unbearable.
Right.
And so he mentioned, he was like, I talked to a friend, and this friend talked to me about marijuana, and then a couple days later there was a small amount of marijuana in my mailbox. And I made my wife a pipe out of wood, and I had her smoke it, and it took her pain almost completely away.
Oh yeah, sure.
So there's that. There was the other side of it where a guy went up, this probably 45-year-old guy, and he was like, I know that marijuana is a gateway drug, because I started smoking marijuana when I was 11 years old, and I by the time I was 13, I was drinking a lot, and I did cocaine for the first time when I was 15, and blah 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 blah, and it was the worst thing for me, and whatever. And the point I'm trying to make is
he's trying to blame it on weed.
Well, it's different. It's different for different people,
right? Yeah.
But when I heard that story, I was like, well, look, man, like, I didn't even know what marijuana was when I was fucking 11 or 12 years old. Right. I had no idea. So maybe it had to do with your circumstances that you were not only smoking weed at 10, 11, you were doing fucking blow at 15 years old. You couldn't even drive a goddamn car yet, and you were fucking ripping lines.
Well, and
crazy train.
I'm not going to say that I didn't have members of my family that smoked the reefer when I was younger. They did, absolutely. I probably saw my first bong when I was 8, running across it in a cabinet at my aunt's house. The difference was, like you said, the circumstances. Yes. I saw people smoking marijuana that had jobs. Yes. That went to their job every day and came home, and it was the equivalent of having a couple beers. You know?
Right.
It wasn't the end-all be-all of existence. It wasn't the instigator and the problem.
Right.
No.
It was used responsibly.
And they were still productive.
They were still productive members of society.
Right.
And that, I think, is where the real issue comes in. Now, of course, you're talking about, like we said, like your brain isn't even properly formed until you're 20 years old, 21, period. So whenever you're talking about using marijuana at that young age, I don't advise that. I don't advise anybody use it until they're 19, 20 years old because of
Most
that fact.
definitely.
Because of the fact that like your frontal lobe and your decision-making cortex just is not formed yet.
Right.
Literally, like by all biology that we know of right now, your frontal cortex is not finished forming until you're like almost 20 years old.
For
You
these
know?
doctors to be pushing these pharmaceuticals to young kids, the ones that parents go to the doctor and say, "Oh, little Johnny rebels. He doesn't want to do his homework. He doesn't want to
Neither
go
did
to
I.
school." And today, yeah, I mean that's normal stuff.
Not true.
Like
I didn't
normal
want to go to
kids
school.
go through. Like a lot of times, kids rebel when they're young. They do stupid things, and stuff like that. But now they're getting prescribed drugs, Ritalin, Adderall, whatever it may be.
Chewable speed.
Maybe even depression medicine.
Yeah.
And for a kid and its brain still growing, these drugs, I believe, are taking a great toll on the brain.
I completely agree.
And
I totally agree.
That's just it. What kind of society are we creating? What kind of, like we were saying outside, like, and granted, we come from a different part of a generation. It's odd because our generations are kind of the same, but split down the middle at the same time between Generation X and Generation Y, or the millennials.
Right.
For me, it was still very much the make yourself. You are what you make yourself.
Right.
Even with my anxiety, it's hard for me to take medication, but I will admit the fact full on that I am totally different when I have my medication. I don't freak out nearly as much.
Right.
And I like one dude on the gig I was on in Orlando was like, "Dude, you seem like the most chill guy in the world. Like, I can't imagine you freaking out."
Right.
And I'm like, dude, you don't want to be anywhere near me when I'm freaking out. And at one point, like my locals, the people that were working with me, like ghosted.
Right.
Owner of the company's cruising around. I'm like, I got a couple guys with me, and I got a couple guys over there pulling wires. We're about to go to break. He's like, well, I don't know where your guys pulling wires are because I don't see anybody over there pulling wires. And like, they've ghosted.
Whoa.
So,
Whoa.
Hey, the general rule of thumb is you go find the dude in charge of you and you say, "Hey, break's been called. I got to go to break."
Yeah.
Hey, break's been called. Now I know what the hell to tell the dude that owns a multi-million-dollar company that's cruising around saying, "Hey, where are your dudes?"
Right. When I was in...
I came back and I found them after like searching this 2-mile square convention center in a spiral, like a fucking Boy Scout search
Good
properly. I found them.
That's
And,
crazy.
Like I told them.
Yeah.
And this dude Matt was like, "Okay, I think I may have seen you pretty close to pissed off." And that is not a happy Chris.
No.
I don't want to be anywhere near that.
When I was in middle school, 6th grade, actually I think it was 5th grade, I was a very hyperactive child. But I relate it to sugar and fruit punch, if y'all guys remember Hawaiian fruit punch.
Oh, man.
Hell yeah.
Red Dye
Hawaiian
40
punch, son.
really affected me, man. It really
no.
would just make me snap. I would be like, I'm going to go blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to do any fucking work, right?
That and corn syrup.
Yeah. And so my folks, they just kind of went along with the flow, and they didn't really understand anything, but they knew that the new and greatest and latest drug that came out to help ADHD or ADD children was Ritalin. And I was put on Ritalin as a prescription.
What age were you again on that?
Oh, man.
6th
this
grade,
was
you said?
5th grade.
Fifth?
When it kind of started.
All right.
6th grade, I remember going to the nurse's office.
So up
right
around
after
11
lunch.
years old.
Exactly. Right around 10 or 11.
Yeah.
Now they're even suggesting lately, nurses in the schools and stuff, when they have like kids and stuff, they suggest, you might take them to the doctor. You might need some Ritalin and stuff like that.
But and that's the problem is. For me, the problem was it wasn't me just being hyperactive. It was me drinking soda and the sugar and the intake of crap that my mom and dad didn't feed me when I was at the house. I was all about, homegrown food, organic shit, no Coca-Cola at night. It was good, wholesome growing up. But when I went to school, I cheated.
Yeah, exactly.
In an essence. But I do remember once I got on Ritalin, it was night and day, man. I remember being who I was, but I remember being on Ritalin and I just didn't feel like who I was. I don't remember everything. I didn't focus. It didn't give me attention.
Everything existed in a cloud that was right there.
Right, and
potentially.
It didn't put me to sleep like it did for you, but I didn't feel good about it.
Yeah.
Anyways, once I had finally kind of, grown up around 7th or 8th grade, I finally told my mom, like, look, what we're doing with the prescription medication for myself is not an effect, and it's not an effort to solve these problems.
Right.
What I am doing is I am drinking soda. I am drinking Red Dye 40. I'm drinking a lot of sugar. I'm eating
Big
a lot of
Reds,
sugar.
Big Reds and Mountain Dews.
I'm being bad when I go to school, and I told her that. And the surprise to my mom's face, and I still remember, it's just like, wow, like, thank you for telling me that, because it's not you. Well, it is me, but it's me being bad at school. And so after 8th grade, once I went into high school, it was actually mid 8th grade, we just like got off Adderall, or the Ritalin. It was bad news.
Yeah.
But all through high school, I was really able to focus. My focus was music, theater arts, and a little bit of history. I really liked American 18th century history.
Nice.
Like, Thomas Paine, like just
Thomas, I got his book.
Right, like where we are from 1776 to now. I just love that kind of history, the Constitution, all that jazz. But the Ritalin was just it was a bad side effect for me. Long story short, up to here we are to this day. A couple years ago, I got Adderall, being in my late 20s, 28. Adderall, as a different substance of Ritalin, has helped me focus so much more. I have been able to do more research. I have been able to do more projects. I have 2 new jukeboxes I have 2 jukeboxes in my house that are from the late 40s, early 50s, that I have been able to build from the ground up. I have motorcycles now. I have a house. I am able to focus my energy.
You're able to manage your time more readily.
In a more productive way, in a more readily way. Exactly, instead of a Ritalin way. Haha, no pun intended, sorry. I've had a few beers. Anyways, that's...
Well, I think it's interesting, and for some reason I thought of this. It's a slight tangent, but really not too much. I think about pharmaceuticals, whether we're talking about Oxy or Vicodin or things like that have those effects, or we're talking about Ritalin, Adderall, those type of things.
Yep.
Okay,
right.
Very, very highly prescribed, or very, very often prescribed drugs like that. Versus why did I lose it? No, not painkillers.
Heavy narcotic?
No, when they give you the shot for the diseases.
Vaccines.
Vaccines. Why did I brain fart on that? I don't know. Right. So I look at the distinct difference between those, and of course this is my opinion, but I look at, okay, let's say I'm a parent and I choose not to prescribe my child Ritalin because I don't think it's necessary, and I don't want my child to become potentially dependent. I don't want my child to grow up that way, anything like that, right? That makes sense to me. What doesn't make sense to me, and I don't think this is hypocritical, but what doesn't make sense to me is parents who don't vaccinate their children.
That's not hypocritical. It's because different scenarios.
Exactly, and that's I really do believe that those are 2 completely different things, even though they seem to be kind of in the same realm, right?
They're in the same ballpark, most definitely.
Where you choose to medicate your child, or you choose not to.
Right.
Now the difference for me,
you should have that choice. You should
for sure. But the difference for me is okay, MMR vaccines, vaccines for any of those sort of things. Those are things that have been proven, and have been proven for decades now, to prevent you from developing something very life-threatening. Yes. And it's something that we do to prevent you entering a dangerous situation and the people around you.
The problem with vaccines, and I'm getting off topic now, but the problem with vaccines is vaccines do work, but when you start combining like 30 vaccines into one shot for a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old child, the body's reaction to a 3-year-old child is like, oh my god, I got flu, I got polio, I got whooping cough, all of these viruses going into me as a vaccine, as an anti, venom, right? What do I do with these? And the problem is they need to do inoculations. They need to do them separately as a once every 6 months kind of thing. Yeah. And that's my point on
Well, and some doctors do it that way. Other doctors do it in these, like
20 shots right at once, 6 months later, and more 20 shots.
See, I don't like the stories of the kids getting inoculated and then coming down with autism.
But that's not related to vaccines. There's no proof to have vaccines related.
There is some proof on that.
There's some proof, but it's not hugely conclusive proof.
I would say that there's some proof, I would say that there's some potential evidence. I wouldn't say that there's some proof. If you're saying that there's some proof,
the fact that vaccines have been knowably stored with mercury or mercuric elements inside of them, proven.
Mixed with pesticides.
Well, but if it was a proven thing, then it would happen across the board, and it doesn't.
All right, let's get back on to pharmaceutical drugs.
Going back on to pharmaceuticals, my concern, like I was saying outside a while ago, my real concern comes in being part of a database, being pigeonholed as somebody. Like, number one, you got to worry about the fact that as it exists right now by the Department of Homeland Security, veterans are considered a danger to the American public. They were declared as possible domestic terrorists 2 years ago. And since that time, there's been this ongoing campaign to include people with depression, include people on psychotropic drugs into the same category. Yep. And I don't know. To me, it's kind of concerning.
It is. I'd say
even like on the heels of the recent shooting in Houston, which literally happened like just a couple days ago, like Sunday. It happened. I was on my way home from Houston and started getting alerts about it. And then when I got home to Austin, it was like in mid-action, like a neighborhood right where I grew up was locked down with a dude with an AR-15 that was shooting like 200 rounds.
And one of the number one things they say when stuff happens like that is this person was depressed. He was taking meds or something.
Well, and that's what just came out
and
today.
So then, as you go to the doctor, as so many do, and push depression medicine on everybody else, you're entered into a database. Yeah. And you're taking a depression medicine, so you're on the list as a potential, whatever. And to go even further with this, I think eventually it's going to affect jobs. Jobs are eventually going to have access, I believe, to medical records, just as they do criminal records to a certain extent. And you will be judged not only, you think at this point, criminally, when you get a background check for criminal record, but you're going to also get medical background check.
Oh, that's a really interesting point. They have not done that yet. However, with the way that the database exists, it could absolutely be done.
Right. So this database, let's say you go see a psychologist and you see him for attention disorder. He prescribes you Adderall.
Yep.
What happens from there? What is this database?
Well, with certain prescriptions, Xanax being one of them, like as someone who suffers from anxiety, I know many family members that have used Xanax that have the same issue that I have, and they're like, hey, you should really explore this. It's something that works very well. And that is specifically one of them being a benzodiazepam that you are bound to take a piss test for. You have to pee in a cup, and you have to let them know that, like we were saying outside, that not only is your regulated amount there, I mean, they're trying to keep it from being sold on the black market, number one, so it's a means of regulation. At the same time, it's the fact of this is in your system. And of course it's in my system. You've prescribed it to me. You hope I've been taking it. But like where does it come the difference between privacy and public knowledge? Because technically, that is your medical record. That's something that is supposed to be sacred between you and your doctor.
Right.
Why is it that the federal government needs to put you on a database?
Right, but that database is not public knowledge. It's not public knowledge. That's a
the line is
okay. But the how many court cases do you see? How many Law and Orders do you see where a doctor is claiming patient-client confidentiality,
right?
And yet still here comes the federal government stomping on patient-client confidentiality.
Well, I don't necessarily think that it's stomping. I mean, when we were outside, we were also talking about like gun laws and gun control and things like that, and keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people. And it's a very fine line. It is, but if you're going to give a gun license to me, which I've never had any mental health issues. I've been dealing with maybe some mild depression lately, but like other than that, whatever.
Right, who doesn't?
Or let's say, the person next to me is schizophrenic. Yeah. So what do you do? I mean, should that person just have the same rights as me as far as
here's the question,
getting a gun?
though, because when it comes to your medical record and when it comes to even getting prescribed these things, a lot of questions are asked, like do you use marijuana? Do you drink on a regular basis?
Right.
And even saying that you have 12 beers a week. Something like that. What if that was to come into realm? What if that was to come into question as to whether or not you could now have a gun permit? Because you drink a 12-pack a week, government says that's too much. That's where the doctor-patient confidentiality comes
But I don't think
exactly.
I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I don't think it's a perfect thing, but I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing because it's one of the most incredible responsibilities ever to own a gun.
Sure.
It's not I realize that a car technically is a deadly weapon, and I realize that there are other things like other licenses and things that you can get, that are dangerous or whatever. But a gun is something that literally could go off at any point. It is something that if you're that is something that
I get where you're coming from, but when we're talking about the realm of pharmaceutical drugs, and when the psychiatric personnel who was evaluating you for these drugs, or the federal government has put you on some sort of
watch
list.
Yeah, right.
When they tell you, do you drink? Do you smoke weed? All of that jazz. Those things do have a psychiatric side effect when you're taking those drugs. So
they have them anyway if you're taking drugs or not.
Yeah. Exactly, and that is the problem because I feel like people would lie just to get the Xanax, just to get the Adderall, so they can pop it when they want. But there's going to be some instances when that person is going to be like, I've been on Xanax for 3 months now, but I really want a 6-pack. I'm going to go get a 6-pack of Sierra Nevada, which is the best beer, and I'm going to just drink it with being on Xanax, and then who knows what kind of loop it's going to throw them for.
Right.
And I understand the pharmaceutical drug, and I understand people using recreational drugs like weed and alcohol. Mm-hmm. Alcohol is definitely a drug. I don't know what to classify it as. But when those two make a mixture, it's just like socialism and capitalism. Where do we meet? Where do we meet to make this work?
And who knows? It really depends on the person, and it really depends on the circumstances, and it depends on the mental state of the individual and that sort of thing.
Most definitely.
So what I'm saying is do I necessarily agree with the government putting people on a watch list for taking Xanax? Not necessarily. But at the same time, I can see the point behind it, because if you're taking drugs for serious depression, if you're taking drugs for mental health issues, anxiety, schizophrenia, those sort of things. The mass shootings that we've seen as of late, and in the history of mass shootings since Columbine, basically,
yeah.
the vast majority of those people, the perpetrators in those circumstances, were dealing with serious mental health issues.
And on some kind of psychotropic drug.
Right. So,
the question comes to bear, did they need to be on the psychotropic drug?
Right. And whether they needed to or not.
That's the question that's raised by this episode is, does a 12-year-old need to be prescribed a hardcore psychotropic drug?
Well, again, it depends on the situation.
That's a really hard line to talk about.
It is because if you have a child who is just like kind of acting up in class and kind of whatever, that's a different situation from coming home and seeing like your 10 or 12-year-old child has just like cut your dog to pieces.
Right.
That's different.
Or like myself going to school and being like, just fine being at home, and when I go to school and I start drinking a lot of soda and a lot of red dye, 40, it makes me a different person.
Right.
Like when I go to school and they see me, they're like, oh my god, this kid is a fucking nutcase.
Yeah.
And then tell my folks that, but when I go home, my folks see me as not on sugar or red dye 40. Yeah. So...
Well, but there was a story. There was a story out of Cincinnati that my girlfriend actually brought
Cincinnati,
me,
where we just had
exactly. But there was a story out of Cincinnati that my girlfriend brought my attention to, where there were two brothers, okay, and the younger brother had some very, very serious mental health issues. Yep. We're talking about possible schizophrenia, like things like that. I mean, very, very serious mental issues.
Right.
And the parents, who were kind of high-profile parents in Cincinnati, they tried to work with their child. They tried to send their child to counselors and things like that. I don't know if the child was on medication. I don't know for sure. But when he was 16 years old and his brother was 18 or 19, they got in an argument, and the younger brother beat his brother to death with a baseball bat in their house, and then walked down to the big fountain in this city square in Cincinnati, and kneeled and started washing his hands off in the fountain, and people were like, that kid over there has blood all over him, and he's washing his hands off in the what? And the cops were there immediately. And it's one of those sort of things where with serious mental issues like that, if you're talking about putting somebody on watch or on a watch list or something like that, I don't necessarily agree, or I don't necessarily disagree with doing that when somebody of that mental capacity has the potential to do something like that.
But how do you rule that person from the others that aren't?
Well, I mean, but how do you rule anybody out?
He killed his brother.
Well, then it's too late to know that.
Right.
So
but
how do you know that before that?
Before that, I mean, there are professional
psychiatrists. So that's why the government now, whoever gets any damn depression medicine,
that's what has to be called into question, is the professional psychiatrists and everything else.
That's why they had that list.
Were they brought into use? Did they do the job screening him that they were supposed to do? Now, should everybody that goes in and ask for this necessarily be put on a government watch list? No.
Right.
No. Because the grand number of people, just like the grand number of people coming back from overseas combat, are not a risk. They are not. Despite their training, despite everything else, but for some reason, they're being pigeonholed because there have been a couple of instances where this stuff, like what happened in Houston, has happened.
Right. Well, and it's easier to put someone like that on a watch list than it is to actually help that person and put money into helping that person. And I mean, you can talk about welfare and taxes and whatever going into that, but I mean, that money that we pay in when we have goods and services and we pay income taxes and shit like that, there's money that goes to that, and more of it should be going to that.
Oh, more of it especially should be going to our VA, and that's a huge issue. That's
Bernie Sanders.
That's one of my big that's one of my biggest issues with Bernie Sanders. He was the dude that was in charge of rehabilitating the VA, and nothing really happened. And then Obamacare happened, and it was modeled after this awesome VA system. And it's the VA is horrifying. There are only 30% of vets that get the help that they need.
Right.
The rest of them are indigent now, and it's horrifying. It's horrible.
Well, I wouldn't say the rest of them are indigent.
Well,
but like,
it's the fact of they're dealing with wounds beyond mental capacity. They're dealing like I know a dude.
I think they're dealing with wounds beyond physical, and it's affecting the mental in a very significant way.
Well,
I would put it that way.
Oh no, most definitely, because I mean you're looking at the suicide rate of vets being just
the mental is way deeper than the physical.
Right. Well, and it's
so and a lot of it is because of the fact that they have physical wounds that they cannot deal with the pain of. They can't deal with the pain of their physical wounds, and they don't know how to deal with it mentally. And it leads to horrible situations.
But on top of that, and I would think more so the case is whether you have physical wounds or not, you were put into a situation where you were in a battle circumstance. Yeah. And none of us have been in that circumstance. No. None of us have been sent to a place that we've never been to, and all of a sudden we are expected to go into places and kill.
Yeah.
And kill.
Yeah.
If we need to. And I think that, you know, in a lot of circumstances, somebody who loses a leg or loses a limb in Afghanistan or Iraq, their wounds and the effect that it has on them can be equal to or can be even less than somebody dealing with serious mental issues. The mind is incredibly fragile. And if you go overseas and you lose a leg, like there is a physical rehabilitation that needs to happen, there's a mental rehabilitation that needs to happen, and I would argue, obviously I've never been in the situation, but I would argue that potentially is easier to deal with than a soldier who was doing a 9-month or a 12-month tour, and halfway through his tour or her tour, this person was in a situation where they had to kill a child.
Right. Yeah.
Because they, in the moment, thought that child was a threat, and they killed a child.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, they're still over there for another 3 to 6 months, and they're dealing with it the entire time.
Right.
And the entire time that they're dealing with it, they're going back into battle, and they're getting back in the Humvee, and they're getting back whatever, and they don't have time to process it, and they don't have time to deal with it. So when they get back, it's like, what help are we giving these people?
Well, and therein lies the problem. The fact is, we're doing nothing but medicating people. We're doing nothing but putting a bandage over the situation.
Right,
exactly.
We aren't actually solving anything by what we're doing through medication.
Well, it's cheaper to do it that way, and it makes more money to do it that way. It's really counterintuitive, kind of. But
therein lies the problem. And
you know.
On that note, everybody, that pretty much wraps it for this edition of Dudes and Beer. Thank you so much for tuning in. Keep tuning in. www.dudesandbeer.com. Until next time, everybody, if you can't be good, be good at it.
Yeah.
Take care.
You've been listening to the Dudes and Beer podcast. Visit us online at www.dudesandbeer.com. Find our audio streams on SoundCloud.com and Spreaker.com/Dudes and Beer. Follow us on Facebook /Dudes and Beer. Thanks for listening, everybody. And until next time, drink responsibly.